Hello, today I have a long stopover in Dubai, and here I am in Emirates business class lounge on concourse B, where they have a dedicated Moet Chandon bar. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to taste my way through the range. Now I already have a tasting from Moet Chandon Brut Imperial, tried in Auckland on a previous trip, but thus far I've been able to taste the non-vintage Brut Imperial Rosé, the Grand Vintage 2016, and then to round that out, I have quite an unusual wine in my glass. It's a sweet champagne. And this is Moët Chandon's non-vintage Nectar Imperial Demi-Sec champagne. So a wine with a significantly higher dosage than you normally encounter. So just to run over the background of Moët Chandon as a company, it was founded in 1743 by a Dutchman called Claude Moët, and his Dutch background is the reason you pronounce the T in Moët Chandon. However, the company he formed was Moët SC, Moët & Co, and it wasn't until 1833 when Pierre Gabriel Chandon de Brailly joined Claude's grandson Jean-Remy Moët running the company that it was renamed Moët Chandon, and I believe Pierre Gabriel was Jean-Remy's brother-in-law. And this was the stage where the company grew to its preeminent position. They introduced a vintage wine in 1842, just 2 years after the first vintage wines were produced. They were one of the first producers to produce a luxury brand champagne when they were given the Dom Pérignon brand in 1927 by Mercier. Today, as well as Dom Pérignon, they also own two other houses, Krug and Veuve Clicquot, and make sparkling wine all the way around the world, having production facilities in California, Australia, Brazil, New Zealand, Spain, also in China and India. In the field of still wines, they own two of Bordeaux's top estates in the Sauternes producer Chateau Yquem and the top Saint-Emilion estate Cheval Blanc. In the New World, they own the Cape Montel winery in Western Australia and also own Cloudy Bay in New Zealand's Marlborough region. Within the Champagne region itself, they have just short of 1,200 hectares of vines with vineyards in each of Champagne's 5 principal sub-regions: the Montagne-de-Reims, the Vallée de la Marne, the Côte de Blanc, Cézanne and the Aube Valley. In fact, of Champagne's 328 crus, they have vineyards in 280 of those, with 50% of their vineyards being in Grand Cru villages and 25% in Premier Cru villages. That having been said, Moët Chandon only owns sufficient vineyards to produce 25% of their overall needs for fruit. Thus, they have to rely on growers for the other 75%. Having said that, they do make somewhere in the region of 28 million bottles of champagne a year. Looking at the statistics that Moët and Chandon for this wine, they are very similar to that for the Brut Imperial and also for the Brut Imperial Rosé. And I suppose the point to realise is that the base wine is likely to be exactly the same. It's only at the stage of dégorgement, after the second fermentation, when a dosage is added, that the wine's sweetness is actually determined. So again, this is a Pinot Noir rich blend with somewhere between 40 and 50% of the fruit going into it being Pinot Noir, with a further somewhere between 30 and 40% being Meunier, and then the remaining 10 to 20% of the wine being made up with the white grape variety Chardonnay. And again, as with the Brut Imperial, depending on the year, there's between 20 and 30% of reserve wines going into the blend to provide some additional complexity. Thus, all the other elements of production will be exactly the same. The wines will be hand harvested, they'll be gently pressed, and it will be the earlier pressings that are used to make this wine, with the tails from the press being sold off to other producers. The wine will ferment in temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks. It will all undergo malolactic conversion to reduce the sharpness of the acidity, to get rid of that sort of deeply harsh crispness that would exist otherwise. So again, my assumption is that once it's been bottled with yeast and sugar to undergo its second fermentation and create the sparkle, it will then age in Moët's cavernous underground cellars in Épernay for somewhere between 21 and 24 months prior to being dégorged and the yeast being removed, having been riddled down to the neck, frozen into an ice plug that's then ejected by the pressure of the bubbles. So at this stage the wine is topped up, and that's where it gains its sweetness. Compared to the Brut Imperial, with 7 grams per litre of sweetness, this is given 45 grams per litre. The wine is labelled as Demi-Sec, but I think we really regard its sweetness as medium. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? There is a fine bubble, still rising despite the fact that I've been talking for several minutes now. It has a pale yellow colour. Let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The aromas are yeasty, there are lemony notes, but then there's also a confected note. It's not quite rich enough to be honeyed, but it's like a sort of quite a sweet stone fruit, a sweet peach or something like that. I suppose there are notes of pear, apple, there's a lemoniness. But they're all a little indistinct and just overlaid with this sort of slightly confected note. So that's for taste. On the palate, you get a fresh acidity that's immediately overlaid by a sweetness. The wine has notes of apples, pears. There's an almost sherbety note to it, again with that sweet peach fruit. But it's at an in-between point where the sweetness isn't enough to be rich and honeyed, but the acidity isn't enough to keep the wine fresh and clean. And as a result, the finish is a little clumsy. I'm not getting a lot of yeasty complexity. It's quite a good intensity of flavour, but it doesn't really have a great amount of focus. I looked at the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this wine, and it's getting 87 out of 100. Well, I guess the wine's richness probably does support that. I almost wonder whether that's being a little generous, because the wine really doesn't quite seem to find its focus. I will admit there's a youthful freshness to the aptly and ripe pear side of the fruit notes, and I do wonder whether, given some time to age, one might find more sort of richness, more honeyed note. You might see some toasty notes come out of the wine as autolytic flavours start to show themselves. So I do wonder whether aging the wine for 2 or 3 years might actually see an improvement in it, but I'm not completely sure where this wine sits. It's not sweet enough to be a sweet dessert wine. Personally, if I want simple, fresh fruit from a sparkling wine, I'm probably going to buy a Moscato. So I'm not completely sure that I know what the wine's role is, and I'm not sure that it's really convinced either, which in some ways I think is a great shame, because I personally believe there's a fair proportion of drinkers who really don't like champagne because they find it's too sharp, too tart, too dry. Having said all that, it's a long time since I've managed to look at and taste a Demi-Sec champagne. So I think it's great that Emirates have this Moet Chandon Bar in their business class lounge here in Dubai. While I will own that maybe Moët Chandon aren't perhaps the most challenging champagne brand, it's a really nice opportunity if you've got a long stopover, time to kill, and if you just want to have a wonderful experience in a midpoint of your trip with your friends and your family. I do think it's great here. I'm here at a time of the day where it's fairly quiet, but I do find that this bar is tucked away at the back of the business class lounge here at Concourse B, and not many people know it's here. They do also offer some suggested food pairings that give you a chance to experiment a little with how you would serve the wine. So all in all, I think a good experience. So thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, do please press the like button. That would be fantastic. If you're watching these videos, you enjoy them, you'd like to watch more of them, it would be superb if you could consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. The more followers I have, the greater opportunities I'll have to develop the channel. To that end, if you have any friends you think might like to watch the videos, do please feel free to pass it on to them. I would really appreciate your endorsement in that way. And if you have any questions or if you have any comments, do please pop them in the comments box below. I'd love to hear what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. I will of course leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this wine, so that you can see if it's available near you, at what price, and who's selling it. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch the video right to the end, and I do hope that maybe you'll manage to make some time and come and join me for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.